Welcome. Thank you for joining me. Grayboardgamer here with a playthrough of In Tenebris Lux. Let's get this box open and get it set up. The first part of the setup is selecting our explorer, getting a narrative for that explorer, and getting 3 pieces of initial equipment. And as always, I like to do things randomly. So I'll grab these big explorer cards, shuffle them, and we will be the treasure hunter. When you would draw a find, you may instead draw 2 and discard 1. Well, I've never played with the treasure hunter before, so this will be nice. Alright, and I'll go over what all these symbols mean in a moment. And let's see what his narrative is. And the narrative cards are what we need to do to win the game. So I'll give these a mix. And we have the Curse of the Moon. Travel to the Temple of the Moon after, I'll explain that later. Once you have entered the Temple of the Moon, you cannot draw find cards. You may complete the narrative by entering the Chamber of the Sun. So we're going to need to find a couple of different chambers in our catacombs. And now we will grab our equipment cards. Give these a quick shuffle and mix, and we start off with 3 pieces of equipment. Let that focus. We will have climbing gear. You do not reduce your movement when crossing, and then there's that heart symbol, that type of hazard. So the climbing gear will keep us from having to reduce our movement there. And we have a sword. Add 1 to rolls in combat. You may instead add 2 before rolling. If you do, discard this card at the end of turn. So if we want to use that special ability to add 2, then we lose our sword. And finally we have a shotgun. Add 1 to rolls in combat. You may also re-roll your dice roll, or you may re-roll your dice once in combat. If you do, discard the card after combat. Alright, that's our initial explorer, narrative, and 3 pieces of equipment. Let's get those set up and I'll explain the symbols on them. And here with the treasure hunter, we have the choice to either keep our cards in our hand or place them in the array. And the array are these 4 slots for items, equipment, or finds to go in. You have the skull, the hand, the pelvis, and the rib cage. And you can see there's a corresponding rib cage on our climbing gear and a hand symbol on our sword. Our shotgun also has a hand symbol, which means we have to choose. So at this time I chose to keep the sword as active, and I'll take the shotgun into my hand. We also have this ring here of symbols. And these represent several things, starting with this fist symbol, which is grit. And you see the 3 with the little drop. That means I start with 3 health. Then we have wit, which is a little brain, and it has the hand and a 4, which means my hand size at a maximum can be 4. Right now it's only 1. I'm only holding the shotgun. And then we have the heart symbol, or daring, and then the little foot, which means 5 movement points for my character, so I can move or make 5 moves during my turn. And then there's a couple symbols down here. This was where you would put tokens for your health, and this is where you would put tokens for your expertise. We don't have any tokens that came with the game for health or expertise, so I'm going to use some mini dice that I have to keep track of those items. And we start the game off again with 3 health, and we don't have any expertise as of yet. Next we would draw a public narrative. We already have our individual one for Curse of the Moon, and the public narrative would really come into play if this was a multiplayer game, because everybody would have their own individual narrative, and then the public one would be out on the table for anyone to fulfill in order to complete the game and win. But we'll draw a public narrative, which will also apply to us. It belongs in museum. It says each time another explorer. We're not going to have any other explorers, So we're going to just go past that one because this is a solo game. Seek after horror. Seeker after horror. Each time you play horror, place a token on the room where the horror appeared. When you enter a room with a token for this narrative, transfer the token to this card. When this card has 5 tokens, you may enter the gate of the hand to complete the narrative. Alright, that's another way to win the game for us. So we'll put that right here next to our other narrative. So now we have 2 ways that we can win the game. So we can either complete the Curse of the Moon or Seeker after Horror. And we'll make that determination after we see the catacombs being built and we see how many horrors come out. If there's a lot of them, maybe we'll go for the Seeker after Horror. If we see the chambers that we need for Curse of the Moon early in the game, then maybe we'll attempt that one. But it's good to have a backup plan. The next step of the setup is building the catacombs. And you see we have our catacombs entrance, and it says there can't be any combat in this room until we reach that hourglass symbol. And before we build the catacombs, let me explain what that hourglass symbol means, because it keeps coming up. And it's also on our Curse of the Moon card. We have here the Doom track, which is going to start at 0. And then when we have to add to it, we have 1, 2, and it just follows along the track. If we get to 9 in a solo game, the game's over and we've lost. The hourglass symbol, as you can see, if I can let it focus, yes. And this represents in a 2-player game, a 3-player game. It's basically just past the halfway point, so 5 is just a little over half of 9. When we get to this point, it says 2-player, but it also applies in a solo game, then any card that has an hourglass symbol on it, then those take place at that time. So we'll leave the Doom track here. You won't be able to see the whole thing. We'll focus on it whenever we need to, only when we're adding to it. Actually, I have room for it over here, but I think the glare from the lights, yeah, instead of having glare on it, let's go ahead and just leave it over here for now. So, like our Curse of the Moon states, travel to the Temple of the Moon after the hourglass symbol. So we have to wait till there's at least 5 points on the Doom track. Then we can start fulfilling what we need for the Curse of the Moon. Seeker after Horror, we don't have to wait for that. But if we don't have enough horrors out, then we're not going to be able to complete that one anyway. So we'll have to see how things go. Not only how the catacombs are built, but where the Doom track is at in the game. So as you can see, this is our entrance. These gold angled areas just show you where you can and cannot place cards. This has an exit in all 4 areas, north, south, west, and east. So we can place other rooms in the catacombs up against there like that. And when you're placing rooms in the catacombs, you have to account for all the openings. You can't block things off. So you'll see that as we build it. The rooms come from this nice sizable deck of rooms. We'll give these another mix. I've shuffled them prior, but we'll go ahead and mix them up some more anyway. And then for the setup, you're supposed to draw 4. And we draw 4 because that's how many wit we have, or hand size. So we draw 4. And since this is a solo game, we would draw an additional 4. So we have our 8 rooms now that we need to place in the catacombs, which we'll start doing right now. And the way I do it is I just draw off of the pile that I created here, these 8 rooms, and see where we can fit them. So let's go through the rooms. We have the Inscriptorium. When we come in here, we can look at a player's hand. That's not very relevant in a solo game. And And you can see we have exits to the north, the west, the east, but nothing to the south, which means we could not place this card up here because it would be blocking that exit. But we can go to any of the other directions. And I'm going to choose to place it here to the south. Next, we have the Elder Tomb. And we'd have to draw a horror card if we came in here. And this one is open in all four directions also. So we can place this one anywhere we want. And I'm going to place it here next to the inscriptorium. That way, let me readjust the camera. That way we have an exit to the south. We can put a couple more cards down here, hopefully. The inscriptorium is blocked on the bottom, so I want to be able to have a path to the south. Next we have the Sea of Bones. It allows us to play any discarded room. This one's open everywhere but the south. So this one would be a good candidate to go down here below the Elder Tomb, because that way it'll establish what I want to have as my bottom boundary. There's really no limit other than table size or where you want it to be, but I'm just going to say I'm not going to go past this line, this crease in my table to the south. That way I have place for my player cards down here. Next we have the Depths. When we enter there, it adds, and that cross symbol means doom. If we enter here, we're going to add one doom. And the Depths only open to the north and the west. This is another card that can help illustrate the example. Like, it's open here, but it is not open to the north and to the inscriptorium, so that is not somewhere I could place this card. And I'll choose to place it just to the east of the inscriptorium here. Draw our next one. And we get the Pilgrim's Walk. Ignore the next hazard. And hazards are these symbols when you see them near an entrance or near a place that you can exit and enter the room. And whenever you cross one of those hazards, if you don't have something that helps you get past it, either an item or your own character's ability, then it costs you an extra move to move over it. Since this only opens to the north and the south, it really only gives us one choice. We can only put it here because it would block off anything if we tried to put it to the east or west of something. And now we have the Old Knights. Here the explorers can only roll one die, and that would come into play if we were in this room and had combat. But again, we're open on every side except the east. And I'll place this one here because that'll give me some more room to move to the north and kind of keep me from moving to the east too much, because both of these rooms don't exit in that direction, and kind of leaves this area closed off for where I keep the dice tray. But I'll move it if I have to. Then we got the House of Skulls. Gain a find once per game. That's useful, gaining a find. But this is the first time we have a room that does not have a type, and I didn't explain what that means. So I'm going to set this down and we'll grab the Pilgrim's Walk. Rooms generally have a type, and it's going to be the same symbols that you see for hazards also. Like this is a wit symbol or a wit type room. And then you can also have the other symbols for daring and grit also. But our House of Skulls has neither. It doesn't have a symbol or a type. And in the solo game, whenever you draw a room that does not have a type and play it, then you have to put a horror in it. So we need to first place it, and it can only exit on the south and the east, and then we will draw our first horror and place it. I'm going to put the House of Skulls right here. And that gives us some room to move down to the south for a room. And we already have an exit to the west up here, so that'll help us not close off the catacombs. And we have to keep in mind our Seeker After Horror Each time you play a horror, place a token in the room where the horror appeared, and these will be the tokens that I need to collect in order to complete this narrative. So let's draw a horror and put it in the room. So we have our horror deck, and I'm going to give this a shuffle. I shuffled these before, but I like to mix them on camera. That way you know I'm not setting something up. And our first horror is going to be Crawling Chaos. Active explorers lose 1 health when this horror enters their room. And if the hourglass is in play, explorers can only roll 1 die in combat. Wow. Lose 1 health when this horror enters their room. So the best thing for us to do would be to have ourselves enter the room instead of having it come into a room after us. Here's our crawling horror, or crawling chaos, which is a horror. The token for it will go in that room. And we will put our first seeker after horror token in that room, which we can go and collect later. So we already have 1 token out on the board for us for that narrative, and the Curse of the Moon requires the Temple of the Moon and the Chamber of the Sun to complete, and we have to get past the halfway point, which we have not got yet. As far as the creature cards, they just get placed on the table within view so you can address them when needed. We have 1 room left, and it has a room type, so no more horrors right now. And that is the Worms Crawl, which is open on all 4 ends, and when we enter we have to discard 1 card. This is a good spot for the Worms Crawl because that'll help us build our catacombs out in every direction. You can see that the catacombs entrance does not have a room type, but that does not start with a horror in it. There are also 3 of these large room cards which you may draw and place. So I'll mix these up and I'll draw 1. And if we can fit it into the map, we'll use it. If not, we'll just discard it. And we have the Capitoline Primus. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Draw 1 find for each other explorer. Well, there are no others, so I would assume I would go ahead and just draw 1, since there's only 1 in the game anyway. And this is a room without a type, so if we place this, we're going to have to put a horror in there. And there is really only 1 place it can go, and that's way up here at the far north end of the game board that we're building, because you can't block off rooms. So when we place rooms to the north of these, we have to make sure that there's no opening to the north. So they're going to have to be blocked on the north because of this large room card. But let's go ahead and get a horror drawn and placed in there. And this one is not going to go there because it states it has to be a card without the eye symbol, because these don't place horrors, they just cause some kind of effect to take place. The rulebook states to play a horror in the room that does not have that symbol, so I'll keep drawing until I get one without that symbol, and I got one right away with the next one, which is the Eyeless Beast. Explorers choose their lowest trait for combat. And then later, explorers cannot use finds to contribute to their combat result. So the Eyeless Beast will go into play. Our Eyeless Horror will go into the Capitoline Primus. I looked up the proper way to say it. We'll grab one of our Seeker After Horror tokens, and it'll go there also. And finally we have our Treasure Hunter token, who will start at the catacomb entrance. We are set up and ready to begin. Our treasure hunter is ready to start exploring. And right now, it seems like the smart bet would be to go after the Seeker after horror narrative, since we already have 2 of the 5 tokens we need out there to collect. But maybe the Temple of the Moon and the Chamber of the Sun will come up soon. But again, we have to wait until our doom reaches at least 5 before that one takes place. So it's a good thing we have that backup. But we have to be very careful, because our treasure hunter is just that. He's a treasure hunter. He's not a warrior. And he only has 3 health. And regaining health in the game is not an easy thing to do. There are very few opportunities to do so, so we have to watch. And if we're going to engage in combat, we want to do so on our own terms and make sure we have the best advantage possible. And I'll explain how combat works when we have to go into it for the first time. I'll give a thorough, detailed description of how it plays out. I do have this extra horror card that we drew with the eye symbol that I forgot to shuffle back into the deck, so it is ready to go. And then all of our decks, including the deck that you haven't seen yet, which has finds in it, and that'll come into play. I'll give that another mix real quick. And then our room cards are here, our equipment cards are here. We're all set. You can see the narrative cards over here. They're just barely peeking off to the side. Those usually don't come into play again during the game, so I'll just leave them off to the side, just out of view for now. So we're all set and we're ready to begin our game of In Tenebris Lux.